Welcome back to the closing session of the Southern Region Women's Agricultural Leadership Summit. We are so glad to have you, and we are so glad to welcome our virtual audience as well. We're streaming this session live, and if you are in our gallery, please be sure that you have registered with the desk outside, because we will be sharing the same information that we report back to delegates. We'll be sharing that with our gallery audience as well. So please be sure that you have registered and you're in our database so you can stay in the conversation and receive the information. So for those of you just returning or maybe just joining us out there in the live streaming land, to recap briefly, I'm going to tell you a bit about what went on today. We started out this morning with a fabulous panel discussion that represented all segments of our industry: production ag, agribusiness, academia, government, and industry. Following that, we had a luncheon where Deputy Secretary Krista Harden was the keynote speaker, and she gave us wonderful words of information and shared some of her personal experiences with us. We then came back into the auditorium, and we had a session that was led by the J.W. Fanning Institute for Leadership that collected thoughts and ideas and data that we will be using later in research articles and reports, and to generate the conversation for where we go from here. So our Fanning Institute is part of our public service and outreach here at the University of Georgia, and we're very proud of what we do in outreach. At this time, I'd like to introduce Matt Bishop. He's the director of the Fanning Institute, and he is going to summarize some of the information that was gathered earlier today from the delegates. Matt?
Thank you, Laura. So, for those that were in the room, you know that we focused our facilitated discussion around three primary questions. And those were about what do we continue to do to support increased opportunities for women in agricultural leadership? Number two, what do we need to stop doing? What are the things that are limiting us and causing barriers for women in agricultural leadership? And then thirdly, what do we need to start doing to support increased opportunities for women in agricultural leadership? So, because we did this 30 minutes ago, right, it's fairly difficult to provide a comprehensive report on the session, but note, that's absolutely what we will be doing. Every single word that was typed into the laptops earlier will be reported back to you. We're going to theme all of that and summarize all of that, but in the appendix, you'll actually see the typed responses. So you'll get all of that as a result of the conference. But what I'd like to do now is, Lori has developed a new term for me, a wordle for each of the responses that we did this afternoon. This one is the continue wordle, the results of that. So I'm not sure how it works, but I do know that the frequency of words used in the responses is what drives the size of the words that you see in this graphic. So, and what we walking around and hearing the responses, what we're going to hone in on this afternoon is the word mentor. One of the themes that came out of the continued discussion was that at multiple levels, there needs to be continued mentoring opportunities to create opportunities for women in agricultural leadership. So at one level down, all the way down into the K-5 level of school systems, right? Continuing what we're doing with FFA and 4-H and other mechanisms such as that. But in addition to those, to go younger, try to create mentoring opportunities for females down into the K-5 level. But also continue peer-to-peer mentoring, so farmer to farmer, board chair to board member. The types of activities that happen in agriculture, there has to be some mentoring opportunities. And frankly, what was written down and said throughout the response, it's okay to have a male mentor. Get mentored is the overall theme there. One other, or actually two other continues that we gleaned from the responses was continue statewide partnerships and platforms that cut across states. And the example used throughout the continued discussion was Annie's project. So continue opportunities such as that to promote women in agricultural leadership roles. And then finally, continue this type of conversation. Continue to provide venues and platforms for individuals from a variety of organizations and interests to share best practices and to think about the ways that opportunities can be created for women in agricultural leadership positions. So that was the continue. Remember, the second question that we posed was about barriers and limitations. What do we need to stop doing that might cause barriers for women in agricultural leadership? And here's the wordle. And you can see a lot of intensity around tradition and roles and men and position. Ourselves was interesting. So again, I wanted to just talk through a couple of things that we gleaned from the data in the short time that we've had. Stop generalizing, right? Stop the generalizations about what women can and cannot do as leaders in agriculture. Stop the notion of what does a farmer look like, right? We've got to break the mold of tradition in terms of what a traditional farmer is all about. Stop not speaking up and offering our opinions. And that was themed in many, many of the responses. Also, in terms of communication, and not stop not communicating, but also the non-verbalized barriers. And some of the one example that was used there, stop the meeting before the meeting. Y'all remember talking about that? Stop positional authority, right? Just because your granddaddy's daddy's granddaddy was in that position 200 years ago doesn't mean you're entitled to that position. So that was another theme. Stop using access to capital and finances as a barrier to progress. I know one table in particular talked about that a lot. Start being educated about those kinds of things, but don't let the idea that you don't understand how the capital game works or the financial game works be a barrier to progress in women in agricultural leadership. Stop tearing each other down. Stop the degrading comments about one another. I can't read my own handwriting. And stop the perception of being a super mom. That was one that we also gleaned from some of the data. So those are some of the stops. And then finally, we honed in on the question about what do we need to start doing to support increased opportunities for women in agriculture. And thank you, Lori. So this is the intensity of some of those words, as you can see in this graphic. And again, I'm just going to read through some of the things that you talked about. Start more leadership development opportunities for women. There, frankly, is a gap there. There's a void in opportunities available to women in agricultural leadership. And we have to be intentional and purposeful about creating those opportunities. Start educating not only ourselves but others on the real issues that women face in agriculture. Start doing more research of this issue. It was noted to me during this discussion that there's a gap in what's in the literature, what we know about the issues and challenges facing women in agricultural leadership. Start programs that will retain more women. Y'all remember talking about that? Retention was the big issue there. Sometimes the female is put into the leadership position, but for some reason or another they don't last. So this was about creating opportunities for women to retain their positions of leadership. Start leading by example. Start looking at other industries that have potentially cracked this nut, right? What are best practices out there in other types of industries and business where the gap in women in leadership positions has been closed or been addressed in more effective ways? Start being authentic. It's okay to say that we're having a bad day today, right? Start stronger male-female sponsorship opportunities. If the reality is that men are in leadership positions, then the logic is that men are going to have to be sponsors and mentors of females. So let's figure that out. If that's the only way to get mentored in agricultural leadership, then let's figure out how to make those stronger. The bottom line is start getting mentored in some aspect of agricultural leadership. Start recognizing that women have unique challenges in the workplace. So the specific example is this conference, where was childcare being offered? So a very specific example there. Start building each other up across all organizations and not just those that are women specific. Start more concerted efforts to get to our youth, and we talked about that earlier with the Continue, so that's a nice value added there. Start dispelling myths about women and their ability to be leaders in this field. And then finally, keep this thing going. So that's my report in the 30 minutes since we talked. So thank you all very much for the opportunity to visit with you this afternoon.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Fanning Institute. That was some great turnaround fast, and we really appreciate that. Today, we had a wonderful day. We had a great conversation. We started the conversation. We made many new friends, and I guarantee you, each of you were just like me. You wrote down a lot of notes. You wrote down a lot of things to think about, things that maybe you want to do, actions that you want to take. And I want to let you know some of the specifics that will come out of this conference and then talk a bit about where we go from here. Specifically, out of this conference, we will generate a comprehensive report from the summit that will break down the group findings. You will get some of this information back. We'll send that out to the delegates and to the gallery so that everyone will have this information. One of the things we've been asked quite a bit, and I definitely think it's a piece that we need to do. I hope my awesome committee is listening. I see them smiling at me because they say, Laura, when you say we need to do, we need to have a template for the logistics of how we put on this event so that you can replicate it. And I don't necessarily mean replicate it in other states, but I could go home to Colquitt County and replicate this in Colquitt County and make a difference. There are plenty of people in my hometown to have this conversation with. So think about how you, on a large scale or a small scale, can replicate what we did here today. We will definitely collaborate and write some academic articles that we'll submit to key journals and business publications. One of the things you've heard today is that there is not enough out in the literature about women's role in leadership positions in agriculture in particular. And I am really glad that we have bright young academicians that are willing and wanting to do this. And so I think down the road you will see more of this in the literature. We will create a set of recommendations for key stakeholders and policymakers on specific things that they can do to further women in agricultural leadership positions. Just like at the University of Georgia, that the president and the provost are being very intentional about how they go about searching for new positions so that they are looking for bringing female talent into the administrative roles. We will come up with a list of things, best practices that we can share with other organizations that can be utilized. We'll create a set of recommendations for women serving in agricultural leadership roles on how to move forward and advance their leadership and the leadership of women in similar roles. So those are concrete things that we know we are going to do. There are probably a lot of things that we're going to do that we don't even know what they are yet as we brainstorm and we recap and we talk about how we move forward. When you move forward from here, you will receive an evaluation survey from us. I know how irritating those things can be sometimes. I have 3 in my inbox right now from Hilton Garden Inns. I am not going to tell them about another one of my stays, but very faithfully they send me a note every time I stay there. But please, when you see this evaluation survey in your inbox, take the time to sit down, think about what you want to tell us, and give us some meaningful feedback. We'll ask you about some of the specifics of the conferences because obviously we want to get better every single time we put something on. We'll ask you about things we did well, things we forgot, but also we want to ask you about your ideas of how we can keep this conversation going and how we can strengthen this effort. So please don't delete that directly to the trash can. So what can you do back in your state? Take your directory. I just want to compliment our Office of Communications and Creative Services. Some of the materials I never saw except in the black and white typed form. So when I actually saw it printed, I was blown away. They do a fabulous job, and they have made us a wonderful directory of all of the participants that we can take home so you can stay in touch with some of the people that you met today. We will also furnish our gallery participant contact information. We will have a website where these things are available, and if you're looking for someone that participated today, you can go to one of these directories, but if you don't find them, call one of us or contact one of us. We will be glad to help you. Also, I want to challenge you to make it a personal effort on your part. Take personal responsibility to think of what can I personally do? What can I do moving forward? I'm not going to wait for my university or my organization or my Farm Bureau chapter, but what can I do to help keep this movement going forward? I just want to end by recapping some of the themes we heard today. A lot of people that work with me know my mother. Many of the great lessons that I know today I learned from my mother, and they were ingrained in me from the time I could listen. You know, she's big on the golden rule: do unto others as you would have people do unto you. Treat people like you want to be treated. Every single day I walked out the door, she said, well, give a good day's work for a good day's pay. And she had so many great words of wisdom. Some of those are really, they're things you probably already think about a lot, but I think some things were lifted up today that bear repeating. First of all, you've got to know yourself. You've got to know your strengths, and more importantly, you've got to know where you're not so strong. You've got to know those weaknesses, and you've got to be not afraid to figure out what those are and get stronger in those areas. Anytime I've ever applied for a job or ever did anything, the very first thing I did was think about, okay, you know, where am I defunct, and, you know, what questions are going to come at me from that side of things. I think it's important not only to know our strengths, but also know our weaknesses and get better in those areas. Something that came across loud and clear: don't wait for somebody to ask you. Step up and volunteer. You know, you can make that move yourself. Be an expert. Maybe my favorite quote out of today is smack them with your knowledge. So go Caroline, that was awesome. So you know what? You're not always going to be the strongest person there. You're not going to be the loudest person there. But you know what? When you go to the table, you need to be the most knowledgeable person there. That is one of the most harmful things for women in agriculture and any industry, honestly, is when we have people that don't represent us well. So when we go out, we need to make it personal, and we need to be sure that we represent ourselves well. I love the conversation today that you can have it all. Maybe not all of the time, but you can have it all. And we talked a lot about that. I'm happy that it's okay to pay someone to clean your house because I have broken down, and that's one of the ways I was going to save my marriage is to quit fussing about the house all the time. So think about those things that you can give yourself a break on and ways you can make it easier on you. One of the things that I am passionate about is that if you don't love what you do, you need to find something else to do. I tell people all the time when I hire them in Extension, this is the closest thing to mission work that you're ever going to find without selling everything you own and going to the mission field. So if you don't wake up every day excited to do the job, you should find an easier way to make money. So find your passion and follow that passion. That is really important. Build each other up. We are so much stronger collectively than any one of us is individually. So always, it goes back to what my mom says, if you can't say something nice, just keep your mouth shut. If you're not building someone up, just be quiet. That is very important. And it really is up to us to give that compliment, to give that boost, and to give that mentoring and that support that someone needs. The conversation today has really focused, a lot of it has talked about mentoring, but definitely be that person that shares the love. Be that person that lifts somebody else up, that sees where the need is and addresses that need. I've learned a lot from a lot of the younger people that I work with. Lauren Ledbetter Griffith is one of the smartest girls I know. She calls me her mentor, but I say all the time, she schools me constantly. But she did research on the area of mentoring versus sponsoring. Women tend to mentor other women. They tend to make sure they're okay, make sure they're comfortable, give them some mentoring. But what men do is they sponsor other men. They pick them out, they lift them up, and they push them forward. I want us to be both mentors and sponsors. We need to look at both sides of that equation. Another thing that we need to do, and we are pitiful at this in agriculture, is we have got to tell our story. And who better to tell our story than us? We have got to be at the table, and you know what? We got to quit telling our story to each other. I mean, doesn't it get boring just to talk to each other? We have got to get out there and be bold, like Krista said. We got to go into those places that are scary, where we know they're going to heckle us. We know they're going to challenge us, and they're very well informed, and they're going to throw facts back at us. But we've got to be fearless, and we got to go out there, and we've got to help that 98, 99% of the population know what we do in agriculture, or we're not going to be allowed to keep doing that. So it is really important that we tell our own story. I want to thank you today for being part of this conversation. Collectively and individually, you have added so much to today, and you have made this, as they say, a much richer discussion. I want to give a final thank you to our committee. Please, before you leave, if you see someone with a red ribbon, thank them, because there are a lot of unsung heroes. I was the one up here in front of you today, but this did not happen because of me. This happened because we had a fabulous group working very well together, and I really appreciate everything they did. I also want to thank our sponsors once again, the President's Venture Fund, the University of Georgia Women's Leadership Initiative, and the College of Ag and Environmental Sciences. I said, we got to put this together. I don't need to be worrying about raising money on top of the short time frame we have, and they graciously gave us the resources to make this happen, so I really, really appreciate that. And finally, I just want to leave you with a thought. This summit is not about comparing men and women. I loved the part that Krista talked about. We welcome all enlightened men to the conversation. But it is about furthering the conversation of how we can be supportive of each other and supportive of this total industry. So I challenge you today to go away from here thinking about how you can add to this conversation and how you can be a better cheerleader for agriculture. Thank you for being here, and have a very safe trip home. I also want to thank our virtual audience. We are so glad you tuned in. Don't forget to share your information at #WomenInAg. Good evening.